The lake house smelled like pine resin and old wood and something else entirely, something I could never find the right word for, but always recognized the moment I crossed the threshold. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, a steadiness that lived in the walls themselves. It sat at the edge of Carver Lake in the foothills of eastern Tennessee, a wide, low-slung structure with a wraparound porch and green shutters that had faded over 40 years of summers into the soft, weathered color of sage. My grandfather, Warren Ellis Bowen, had built most of it with his own hands. Not every nail, not every beam. He'd had help from his two brothers and a neighbor named Holt who drank sweet tea by the gallon and never once asked to be compensated. But the bones of the place were Grandpa's, the foundation, the framing, the front porch steps that creaked in the exact same spot for as long as I could remember. I had spent more summers there than I could count, and the house had shaped me in ways I only began to understand as an adult. As a child, I would wake before anyone else and slip out to the dock in the gray pre-dawn, watching the mist roll slow and low across the water while Grandpa made coffee inside. He always knew I was out there. He never called me in. He'd come through the screen door with 2 mugs, set one beside me without a word, and lower himself into his old canvas chair with the careful dignity of a man who had earned the right to move slowly. We didn't always talk. Most mornings we just watched the lake come alive, the herons lifting off the far bank, the rings where fish touched the surface, the sky shifting from gray to pale gold to the full blue of a Tennessee morning. Those silences were the most comfortable of my life. I didn't know then that I was storing them, that I would one day need to live off them like provisions. My name is Nora Bowen. I am the youngest grandchild, the one who came back after college when the others scattered toward cities and careers and lives that required more noise than Carver Lake could offer. I stayed not because I had nowhere else to go, but because this place and the man inside it felt more true than anywhere else I had ever been. When Grandpa asked me, quietly and without pressure, if I might consider staying on after my grandmother passed, I said yes without hesitation, not out of obligation, out of recognition. This was where I belonged, and we both knew it, and some things don't require more explanation than that. The kitchen table had seated 4 generations of Bowens. It had held birthday cakes and holiday turkeys and long rainy afternoon card games where Grandpa cheated at gin rummy so cheerfully that no one ever minded. It was an old table, solid oak, with a burn mark near one corner from an incident involving a candle, and my cousin Derek at age 9, and a watermark on the opposite end that had been there so long it had become part of the grain. I had eaten thousands of meals at that table. I had cried at it once, when my grandmother died, and Grandpa had sat beside me and not said a word, just put his hand over mine until the crying stopped. Now Derek spread his papers across it like a man who had never once eaten a meal there in his life. He had driven up on a Sunday morning when the lake was flat and the coffee had just finished brewing and the world outside was still and unhurried. He knocked on the door of my own home with the particular knock of someone who has already decided how the conversation will end. Sylvia was with him, her folder tucked under her arm, her reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Pam came in behind them and chose a chair at the far end of the table and looked at her hands. The paperwork was dense and official and arranged with obvious care. Derek explained it in the smooth, rehearsed tone of someone who had practiced in a mirror. There was a family trust, he said, established years ago, and the lake house was a trust asset. And the trust was managed collectively, and collectively the family had determined that my exclusive occupation of the property was inequitable to everyone else. He used the word inequitable twice. He used the phrase fair to all parties once. These were not his words. They had the specific flatness of language borrowed from a consultation. I listened without interrupting. I had learned from Grandpa that silence makes people uncomfortable enough to reveal more than they intended, and Derek, given enough quiet, began to fill it. The property had significant market value, he said. Holding it as a single occupancy residence was financially irresponsible. There were options, rental income, a possible sale, a buyout arrangement. He said all of this with his hands flat on the table, as though the table itself were listening and might be persuaded. We're giving you 30 days, he said finally, to make alternative arrangements. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at Sylvia, whose expression had the composed patience of someone waiting for a reaction they have already prepared a response to. Then I looked at Pam, who was still studying her hands, and I understood that her silence was not innocence. It was a choice she had made and was now stuck inside. "This is my home," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected, and steadier. The trust owns the home, Derek said. Not you. I asked to see the original documents. I asked for filing dates and amendment records. I watched Derek's face. For the flicker I was almost sure would be there, and it was quick and small, like something passing behind glass. And that flicker told me more than the papers did. I thanked them with a politeness so controlled it must have felt like a door closing. And I showed them out, and then I stood on the back porch and looked at the lake for a long time, turning over everything Grandpa had ever said to me, looking for the thing I now suspected he had left behind. He had mentioned a lawyer once. I was almost certain of it. The memory lived in that sideways place where offhand remarks settle, not in a conversation I had been paying close attention to, but somewhere in the margins of an ordinary afternoon. Grandpa had been cleaning a fishing rod, or pulling on his jacket, or doing something else with his hands the way he always did when he said important things, as though the words needed the cover of small activity to be spoken at all. Fella I've worked with for years, Tom Whitfield, good man, keeps things tidy. That was all. I had filed it the way you file things you don't yet know you'll need. That evening, I went to the cedar box in the top drawer of his dresser. I had opened the box once before after he died, cataloging its contents for the estate the way the lawyer's office had instructed. I had noted the small key. I had noted the sealed white envelope at the bottom with my name written on it in his handwriting, small letters, slightly tilted, the cursive of a man who had learned to write in a different era. I had set it aside. I had told myself I would open it when I was ready, and grief had kept moving the date of readiness further out the way grief does. I was ready now. The note card inside was brief, the way Grandpa was always brief when something mattered most. If the time comes that you need this, and I suspect it might, call Tom. He has everything. The key is for the lockbox at First Federal, Box 441. Do it quietly, that's important. Quietly. Beneath the note card was a business card. Thomas R., Whitfield Estate and Property Law. Cookeville, Tennessee. The card was old, its corners softened, which meant Grandpa had been holding onto it for a long time. Which meant he had been thinking about this for a long time. Which meant he had known. He had known, and he had said nothing to me. And I understood why. He didn't want me spending his last months standing guard. He wanted me present. He gave me the quiet years and left the armor for after. I called at 8 the next morning. By 9:15, Tom Whitfield had called back, and when I explained the situation, his silence had the quality not of surprise but of confirmation. The sound of a man hearing the thing he had been told to expect. He asked me to go to the lockbox. I drove to First Federal the following morning with the small key in my coat pocket, and I sat in the parking lot for a moment before going in, holding it in my palm, feeling the particular weight of something a person you loved left behind for you on purpose. The lockbox held a sealed envelope, a USB drive, 3 notarized documents, and a 4-page handwritten letter. Tom drove up from Cookeville that afternoon, and we opened everything together at the kitchen table. What I learned in the next 90 minutes did not shock me the way I might have expected. It settled over me instead, slow and clarifying, the way a fog lifts and reveals a landscape that was always there. Grandpa had amended the trust 14 months before he died. Quietly, thoroughly, without telling a soul except Tom Whitfield. The amendment left the lake house solely to me. The letter explained why in his own words, in his small tilted hand, and reading it felt like hearing his voice so precisely that I had to set it down twice before I could finish it. The USB drive held recordings, 3 conversations, captured on his phone in which Derek and Sylvia discussed the property's value, referenced trust documents they should not have seen, and in one exchange, Sylvia's voice light and certain, talked about listing the house by spring. He had been watching. All that time sitting quietly in his canvas chair, watching the lake and watching his family and saying nothing. He had been building something that would hold me after he was gone. I looked at Tom across the table and I told him what I wanted to do. No lawsuit. No confrontation. A letter, official letterhead, citing the amended trust and the recordings. Sent quietly to Derek and Sylvia. That was all. Tom looked at me for a moment. He said, "You do it this way," he told me. I asked him what he meant. He said Grandpa, in their last meeting, had predicted exactly this, that I would choose quiet over spectacle. That was how he knew, Tom said, that he had chosen right. The letters arrived on a Thursday. I know this not because I was watching for a reaction, but because the lake was particularly still that morning and I had been sitting on the dock longer than usual. And when I came inside and made a second cup of coffee, I felt something shift in the air, a loosening, like a knot releasing in a rope that had been pulled tight for weeks. I did not know then that it was Thursday that the letters landed. I found out later, and it made a kind of sense that it would be a quiet, ordinary day. Grandpa had always said the important things happen on days that don't announce themselves. Pam called that evening. She was the only one who did. Her voice had shed the careful neutrality she had worn at the kitchen table, that studied stillness of someone determined not to be implicated. What replaced it was smaller and more honest, uncertain in the way people are uncertain when they have been shown a version of events they cannot argue with. She said she hadn't known how far Derek and Sylvia had taken it. She said she hadn't known about the documents, about the manipulation of the original trust. She said she was sorry, and the apology had the texture of something genuine rather than something performed, though I held it gently rather than completely. The way you hold something fragile whose integrity you are not yet sure of. I told her I believed her, mostly. I told her Grandpa had known too, and that he had handled it in his own way, and that it was finished now. She was quiet for a long moment after that. Then she asked if I was okay, and I told her I was home. And she understood what that meant because she had spent enough summers at Carver Lake to know that home and okay were, for me, the same word. Derek did not call. Sylvia did not call. Tom confirmed the letters had been received and that no legal challenge had been filed, and given the recorded conversations and the clean documentary record of the amended trust, none would be coming. I did not feel triumph, exactly. What I felt was closer to stillness, the specific stillness of a thing finally resolved. A door quietly and permanently closed. The wooden box of photographs reappeared on the porch one morning without explanation or note. Then the fishing reels. I did not ask about them or acknowledge their return or make any gesture that invited a conversation about what had happened. I simply brought the box inside and set it on the mantel and opened it and held the photographs one by one in the morning light coming off the lake. In the weeks that followed, I began to understand something about my grandfather that I had not fully understood while he was alive. He had loved me in the way that practical, quiet people love, not through declaration but through construction. While Derek and Sylvia had been using words like family and fairness and what Grandpa would have wanted, Grandpa himself had been doing something more durable than talking. He had been filing paperwork, amending documents, sealing envelopes, recording conversations on a phone he had probably needed his reading glasses to operate. He had built me a structure the way he had built the house itself, carefully, without fanfare, designed to hold weight long after he was gone. I still live at the lake house. The porch still creaks in the same spot. The shutters are still the faded color of sage. In the mornings I make coffee and carry it to the dock and sit in the gray light while the mist moves off the water. And the herons lift from the far bank, and the sky goes through its slow changes from gray to gold to blue. Sometimes I bring a second mug and set it in the canvas chair beside me. Though no one is there to drink from it, it is not a sad gesture, it is a conversational one. He is present in the structure of everything around me. In the dock boards that hold my weight, in the deed that holds my name, in the small tilted handwriting on a notocard that told me, with characteristic economy, exactly what I needed to know and nothing more. There is a photograph on the mantel now, the one I found in the wooden box. The two of us on the dock, caught from the porch by some unnamed hand. He is in his canvas chair. I am beside him, cross-legged on the boards. We are both looking at the water. Neither of us is saying a word. We never needed to.